Now, in most places, if you try to, for example, go into the old federal building, the old courthouse down here where I used to work, and you decided you wanted to walk into their atrium at 12 noon, and you wanted to sing loudly or scream or do whatever and create a disruption, that would not go over very well. The U.S. Marshals would come out. They would ask you to stop. If you didn't stop, you would then be made to stop. So there's no question about that. So that's what they ended up doing. So that was what would happen on a regular sort of basis. So you had all these things that were going on out at the various protests that were going on out there. So what ended up happening is the Capitol Police decided that they were going to crack down on that sort of behavior. So what they ended up doing is they ended up making mass arrests. One of the guys that got arrested was a guy who runs a small radio show out in Madison, and he was there covering the event. He got arrested, hires a lawyer, they sue. Now, he wasn't actually protesting, he was just covering the event, and the story today is the taxpayers are paying $75,000 to settle the lawsuit that the radio host filed. Now, the radio host, he gets about 20-some grand from it. The rest goes to the attorney, which happens a lot. He gets $27,500 for being arrested. The remaining $47,500 goes to his attorney. This is a cottage industry sometimes for lawyers. All right, this guy, the radio host, he was covering it. He said he was unjustly arrested. Well, all right, fine. That's $75,000. The same lawyer, though, who handled this case, now says that he is looking at a much larger case, and he is representing about 75 other protesters who were arrested in 2013 before they put these new rules into effect. He says he's going to likely file this as a class action lawsuit in federal court in Madison. The attorney says this could be millions of dollars. We could be looking at millions of dollars. Now, the case is more challenging because these were people who were actually being disruptive and were protesting rather than simply covering or observing the protest. But nevertheless, they're going to be looking potentially for millions of dollars because they were arrested for their disruption at the Capitol. I want to open up the phone lines. Our numbers are 414-799-1620, 800-877-1620. That's the Accunet Mortgage toll-free talk line. Now, I understand, once again, this is the People's Republic of Madison, and you're going to get a jury that comes potentially, if it goes to a case, if there is a jury that comes from the western half of the state. But seriously, millions of dollars for creating a disruption at the Capitol and being arrested? What do you think? 414-799-1620, 800-877-1620. That's the Accunet Mortgage toll-free talk line. What happened is, in general, after these arrests, there were tickets that were issued. The Dane County judges were falling all over themselves seeking to dismiss the tickets because this is, of course, Dane County, and that's what happens when you are a protester in Dane County. But should the taxpayers be paying a dime to these people who were arrested in connection with their protests in 2013? 414-799-1620, 800-877-1620. That's the Accunet Mortgage toll-free talk line. I know they settled this case involving the radio host, but all right, Brad Schimmel is the Attorney General. He's handling it. Is this one where one dime should go to these protesters, or should the government fight this tooth and nail? I do want to give you a heads up about this, because if you are a taxpayer, you should be caring about this, because there are some people out in Madison who think they have a chance to win the legal lottery. You had a number of people who were arrested at the protests at the state capitol during 2013. They really went out there, I think in many cases, at least some individuals, went out with the idea of trying to get arrested. We were going to be disruptive. Some were more disruptive than others. But you now have the precedent that's been set, because there was a guy who works and does a radio show that nobody listens to out in Madison, or no significant number of people listen to, and he ended up getting arrested from observing the protest. He's now reached a settlement for $75,000, most of which end up going to his attorney, which is how these things often work. But now, emboldened, the attorney is saying, hey, we're going to be filing this class action lawsuit. The settlement here, the money could be in the millions for people who were arrested at the Capitol. At some point in time, you end up having to say enough is enough. There are situations, and this happens a lot when it comes to plaintiffs' work. A lot of times companies settle for what they call nuisance value. They look and they say, okay, this is what the potential we could lose. If we lose the lawsuit, this is how much we could be out. We're in a situation where what we're going to do is just try to cut our losses because we have to pay our attorneys to represent us and all these things. So we'll pay out money. And we'll give the lawyer money to make the lawyer go away, and, we'll give small amounts of money a lot of times to the people who are part of the class. Sometimes class actions are very, very legitimate and are necessary. A lot of times these class action lawsuits, well, they serve to enrich the lawyers more than they serve to enrich any of the individual plaintiffs. Now, I don't take any position one way or the other about the motivation behind this threatened lawsuit, but I do say at some point in time, I think the state has to kind of draw the line. And that would be saying, all right, if you were arrested for misconduct at the state capitol during these protests, we don't care if ultimately the judges tossed these cases because this is Dane County. We're not going to issue these settlements. We are not going to be intimidated. We're not going to be bullied into this stuff, and we're going to fight it. And I guess if taxpayers in the western half of Wisconsin decide that they think that these plaintiffs who file the lawsuit are somehow victims, well, all right, then they can make the awards if the case ends up going to a jury. And if it ends up enriching some lawyer at the expense of taxpayers, well, okay, that's what ends up happening. But at some point in time, I think you have to draw the line and say, we're not going to settle cases, and we're going to fight, and we're going to stand up, and we're going to say, you know what, there still are various rules that need to be followed, and we're going to defend the behavior of the police and the administration who were trying to get control of the state capitol from people who decided they just didn't want to allow the state capitol to be used as a place of work, which is what it really is. So I'm going to be really curious to see how this lawsuit that's been threatened plays out. The lawyer says, well, we could be getting millions. We could be getting millions. And all right, Maybe they're right. Maybe they could end up getting millions, but who knows? Who knows? Sometimes you have to stand up and fight for what's right.